Throughout the ages and various countries, certain souls come into incarnation who have reached a certain point in evolution where they turn their faces steadfastly from the world toward that mountain of divine light, which some call God. In the resources of worldly pleasure, of human happiness, of popularity, or of power, they find no lasting comfort. They are goaded by the sense of being trapped in a world which offers them no satisfying purpose for living, nor food for the soul. They see that material happiness endures not, power fails, pleasure palls, and they are filled, therefore, with unceasing restlessness of mind and spirit. With constant reiteration, they ponder the great questions: why and to what end? If these words resonate with you, then do proceed. They are for those who know that personal happiness passes, and that personal power often arouses discontent. These words are offered for those who desire earnestly to know the true purpose of life, the reason for human existence upon this planet, something of the plan and the way toward spiritual fulfillment. Yet upon the many crossroads of our planet, its byways and highways, travel those who seek the gateway of liberation. In some long past time, the seed of spiritual truth was planted in their hearts, a vision of the gateway which leads to the shining land of at-one-ment, which urged them, life after life, to seek the reality that lay behind the vision. Perchance they awoke the intuition, or some wise teacher came along that gave them the right knowledge at the right time that led their still human feet to the entrance that leads to divinity, and later rises again, strengthening the need to storm the rocky heights which guard the citadel. Yet, when attained, makes one no longer a son of man, but a son of God. For if the spiritual path is to be found, if the path is to be trod, the vision of the goal recognized, like a lodestar, must rouse in the soul that holy fire, which alone can give the power to achieve liberation. Before we begin our exploration into the occult wisdom, let us first lay down some of the preliminary concepts or principles that are at the core of these teachings. These must be clearly cognized for one to truly benefit from the ideas put forth in this video. Firstly, the spiritual occultist tries to see the world as it is, composed of energies and forces. In the broadest context, this can be understood as the inner world of spirit and the outer world of form, as well as their mutual interaction or relationship. Within these inner and outer worlds, there is the expression of unity or oneness, just as there is the expression of diversity or multiplicity. It is equally important to discern between the two. Yet, the mind must never get lost in the diversity and always hold in the back of its awareness the underlying connection of all existence. Secondly, we must ever strive to see ourselves as souls, uniting spirit and matter. The evolution of our consciousness coincides with the reincarnation of our soul as it gathers experience upon the physical plane. In each life, we learn certain lessons and develop certain faculties required to progress forward. Yet, what are we progressing toward? The next kingdom of nature. The whole journey of life is marked out by successive points of growth, or initiations, which lead us from one kingdom to the next, and in this order, from the mineral, plant, animal to the human. The goal in the subhuman kingdoms is for consciousness to build its individuality. Once the human stage is reached, we then learn how to break free of our individual consciousness and enter universal consciousness. It is from this point that the soul liberates itself from the cycle of rebirth in human form. Thirdly, before we achieve this liberation, we must develop our powers of emotion and mind, eventually learning to control the energies that manifest through us. At first, we are unconscious of this process, guided purely by instinct. Yet instinct eventually evolves into intellect, and then intuition. Then we start to become conscious of this process unfolding within us. As we master these energies which link the soul to our personality, we also master the elemental forces of nature, initially just within ourselves, and then beyond our own aura. These elementals are the rudimentary lives which literally shape or build the world based upon the sound produced by the Logos, in the same way that the soul uses sound to build the bodies of our personality. The elementals represent the intelligence within nature itself. Not only the intelligence within all life forms, but also within the actual substance of matter. For example, the intelligence which guides the acorn to an oak tree, or which mutates a caterpillar into a butterfly. or even the creation of a hurricane. The earth has within itself great elemental forces which literally create and destroy continents. On a more personal level, our own thoughts and feelings are a type of elemental force within us that we eventually learn to manage and harness. And just as humans have their own evolutionary path, the elementals also have their own evolution parallel with human growth. This coincides with the cycle of involution and evolution. Much of mythology, religion, and folklore is symbolic of these elemental forces and their intrinsic relationship with mankind. In the Western theologies, the higher ranks of these elementals are referred to as angels, and in the Eastern traditions, they are called devas. Whereas many indigenous cultures have referred to them as nature spirits. And because of their intrinsic bond with humans, we often personify our own attributes onto them by giving them human-like features. In reality, they are spheres of light, often oval in shape, and represent the harmony between light, sound, color, and vibration. Their bodies are more etheric, whereas human bodies are more physical. Humans evolve through conscious creative power and mental faculties. The elementals evolve through feeling, through response to vibration and harmony between all life. It is our job to create and control these forces for altruistic purposes, and it is their job to sustain creation by giving proper vitality to the forms we create and nature. In order that humanity might more rapidly break through the thrall of passing pleasures and understand the laws of evolution, the great teachers have again and again spoken the truth, that life of itself is temporary, and that no lasting happiness may be found in it. If one really grasps this fact, and ceases to follow the endless desire of personal happiness, then the mind lies open to receive the truth, the purpose of life as seen from the consciousness of the infinite. This truth is envisioned by the great ones from age to age for humanity's guidance when it feels the need arise for illuminating light upon the path. When the hour comes in which a human soul truly recognizes its bondage and longs for freedom, then the mind opens to receive the light, heretofore shut away by the constant search for material pleasures. Some do not reach this point until the period of material pleasure passes and/or old age approaches. Then, as they look back upon their life and upon the past, they wonder, what has been gained by this succession of generations, each spending its life caring for and preparing for the next century after century? Nations rise and fall. The progress of civilization is uncertain and often unstable. A cataclysm comes, war, disaster, and the fruits of many years, of many lives, of many nations are swept away. What is the value of this human struggle? What is the purpose? What is the law? When one awakens to a need for knowledge of this inner or spiritual law, when the mind is thus open, then may be given the true understanding of evolution and the final purpose of human incarnation. Herein is the point. It is a high purpose, the gaining of mental stamina through the achievement of independent discernment through the knowledge of good and evil. Once gained, this gives one the power of creative thought, known in the Eastern traditions as Kriya Shakti, or the power of divine creation. On a higher level, this same creative power forms worlds and solar systems, various in kind. At the dawn of the universe is created the union between Purusha and Prakriti, or more commonly known as the marriage between God the Father and Mother Nature. Their interplay brings forth Mahat, or the divine mind, and alone has the power to create and is the creative function upon every plane of existence. It is the secrets of this function which we must learn through sex, speech, and thought. To gain one's heritage of conscious divinity and the divine attributes of creative power which follow upon this, we must be immersed in matter, cut away from the inner wisdom, from spiritual light, and from the consciousness of God, so that we may unfold vision, perceive light, and the Godhead within ourselves. We must confront evil, which is but the other pole of good, negative and positive, attraction and repulsion, in order that we may know it, so we can control it. For so-called evil is actually involution, a necessary part of all cosmic development, but in the earlier stages, associated with the descent into matter or the assimilation of form. That which we know as evil is evil only on the evolutionary arc, when the soul is rising out of matter toward its source to unveil the spirit within. The evolutionary forces represent evil on the involutionary arc, just as the involutionary forces represent evil on the evolutionary arc. In other words, evil is that which is a hindrance to achieving the purpose of the soul at any given point of development. Therefore, the purpose of the involutionary arc is the descent into matter, where the spirit clothes itself in veil after veil of denser forms of matter, eventually the consciousness identifying itself more and more as a separate or isolated unit. In this process, the personality becomes more selfish and self-centered in order to enclose the divine flame within. It is during this period that the law of survival of the fittest must rule, so that the bodies may become powerful and capable of action. As mentioned earlier, this is a cosmic law, but upon our planet, the cycle of involution occurred millions of years ago, as our consciousness passed out of the animal kingdom into the human kingdom. Once accomplished, a human is given their heritage of mind and the spark of divine ideation, logic, and reason. As we slowly evolve our mind, we evolve the power which shall ultimately give us control of the creative forces of the universe and of our own higher nature. It is from here that we step upon the evolutionary arc, where the new goals of self-sacrifice and unselfishness must be developed and consciously expressed. During the evolutionary arc, the goal becomes for the human to overcome their animal instincts and develop their higher faculties. At this point, early on during the unfoldment of the mind, surrounded by all forces, both good and evil, our path is difficult. We do not know good from evil, and therefore we manifest both. The test of our insight will come in the choices we make. It will be proved if we can choose the evolutionary forces, which will carry us upward toward our divinity. If we embrace the involutionary forces, we endanger our heritage, and at the time of ultimate choice, we may choose destruction instead of salvation. It is a long and arduous task, lasting through many eons, as a human is driven by desire, checked by pain, goaded by necessity, slowly awaken from the mental lethargy from our heedless response to impulse. At last, to escape painful conditions around us, or to attain our desires, we begin to use our intelligence. Mankind in its early development is by nature lazy, both physically and mentally, and shrinks from protracted thought, or from the continued action required by a plan which must be carried out. In the beginning of the development of mind, it is not important how a man thinks or what causes him to think. The one essential principle is to develop the faculty of thought. As the greatest virtues the human race knows, power, compassion, and knowledge spring lotus-like from the roots of wrath, lust, and greed, so that the unfoldment of the divine qualities of mind are spurred in its beginning by fear, hatred, and pain. As we evolve, the goads of fear and hate are replaced by others more suited to the evolving spirit. But throughout incarnation, pain remains as the great friend and teacher, refining the subtle bodies, uplifting the soul, guarding us from error and from false paths, and leading us by slow steps to the heights of self-sacrifice, which shall, at last, make us divine. In our ruthless struggle, only as we remember the need for love can we safely unfold the latent powers of mind from becoming overly destructive. It is within a sheath of love that mental powers must unfold. Hence, the work of the spiritual teachers throughout the ages is to show us how we must pass the knowledge we gain from our experiences through the heart, so that wisdom might be garnered. Knowledge separates, whereas wisdom blends. Knowledge tends to be exclusive, wisdom inclusive. At present, men are strongly polarized in the physical and mental more than in the emotional and intuitional, as are women, and thus they supplement one another. In time, men and women will develop complementary aspects on all planes, thus becoming far more useful to one another in the work ahead. Though it's of value to realize as we look back at our succession of prior lives upon this planet, that we have all lived as both man and woman many times, and the path of liberation eventually leads beyond the duality of human form upon the physical plane. Again, the work of the great spiritual teachers is to soften the hardness of our hearts and to keep ever before us in the turmoil of unfolding mental powers the underlying law of unity and love. Firstly, they do this in order to keep the balance of forces. Secondly, they come to mark out the path for those who are ready to step out of human evolution into superhuman or divine liberation and begin the long journey to climb the 7 steps which lead to divinity. In every age, for those who seek the path of initiation, few shall find it, and even fewer shall tread it to the end. Yet the path remains ever in existence, and the way forward may be found by those who bend the energies of their souls to the task ahead. In ancient parlance, it was sometimes called the Philosopher's Stone. Today, the stress of the world is so great that many souls are ceasing to hope that happiness may be found in the experiences of human life. Therefore, they are ready for the reception of the word of purpose in evolution and of the way toward liberation. The 5 requirements for discipleship are recognition of life's purpose, balancing karmic debt, orientation to the path, study of one's character, balancing the mind by awakening compassion. Discipleship here is someone who is a disciple of their own soul or higher promptings. The first requirement for discipleship is the recognition of the true conditions of worldly life and the determination to seek something better, to use life instead as a stepping stone towards spiritual achievement. This is the so-called awakening, and until this takes place, there is no hope of treading the path. The mind must turn away from the hope of personal happiness here and seek the path of a spiritual life. In passing, one should say that the renunciation of earthly happiness does not destroy it. On the contrary, eventually it brings true happiness as a result of the work on the path. For true satisfaction comes not from gratified personal desires, but from love and service to others. The driving motive of human life must no longer be the search for personal happiness, but the quest for truth. When the disciple sees the world as it is and sees through the illusion of form, this is called the awakening, the first step in discipleship. Form is considered an illusion because it's temporary or based upon impermanence. It is also important to state here that discipleship means someone who is a disciple of their own soul. The second is the beginning of balancing the karmic sheet. You must study the conditions in which you find yourself, determining as clearly as possible what debts you owe and what bonds must be served. One must also strive to live consciously in order not to create any new forms of karmic bondage. To achieve a clear view of your conditions, the mind must be dispassionate, calm, and detached, and you must see yourself not as a worldly entity surrounded by people and conditions to whom you owe worldly duties, but as a divine spirit incarnated into the world of causes and effects to achieve certain divine purposes of its own, which seek to aid the greater plan. In order to make more rapid progress, when the balance sheet of karmic debt has been drawn, all things which interfere with the achievement of this purpose must be put aside, or at least achieving a proper sense of one's priorities. There must be no clinging to personal things. In the course of many ages of experience, jewels of the Spirit have been acquired, but overlaid many times with dust and rubbish. This rubbish must be cleared away, the jewels polished and cut. The rubbish consists of prejudices, inaccuracies, intolerances, injustices, and personal defects, such as impatience, irritation, disorder, and slovenliness. These must be steadfastly absorbed, leaving the jewels of courage, accuracy, patience, humility, and charity. Therefore, the first requirement for helping others on the path is your own awakening. Once you have envisioned the purpose and the path, you find enough light to help others upon that same path. Then must come the recognition that the path is for all, and that the greatest service the disciple renders is the illumination of the path itself, since each step upon that path leaves its shining footprints more clearly for others. When suffering cuts into the heart, when the personal self lies in fragments, many doubt the wisdom of the plan, the benevolence of higher powers which bring worlds into manifestation, apparently only to suffer and die. A true understanding of the great plan alone can restore the sanity of faith. At this time in history, where the mind is reaching a relatively high point of development, many teachers are appearing again to show the way of love and the value of human ethics and the necessity for right human relations. The purpose behind each way remains the same: the need of awakening love and compassion at this critical point. When the mind is strong, it shall be guarded by love from destroying the civilization it has built. The spiritual progress of the world is not only determined by the messengers who come to speak spiritual truths in the outer world. People are far more responsive to spiritual realities in the inner worlds, where they frequently visit during the hours of sleep. There, night after night, participating in classes, they learn many things pertaining to the nature of the self. In sleep, many things which filter through as dim memories or flashes of intuition can become a part of our waking consciousness. Perhaps we have attended one of the great classes or public audiences of the wise ones, where their wisdom and radiance is manifest even to the dullest, since their spiritual power is not veiled by the dense sheath of mortal flesh. The work of these classes is carried out by the masters themselves, or by high initiates to direct certain influences in order to awaken the slumbering spark of the divine spirit within those who attend. Often, in the outer world, we are directed to that literature or line of work which embodies the teachings we have been receiving on the inner planes, and which we intuitively recognize as truth. Hence the need for mental discernment between truth, partial truth, and falsehood is always a goal at hand. The first class into which the pupil is directed is that which deals with the personality vehicles, the mind, emotions, and body. Training begins with these three. The student is taught to see the world as a training school, and that certain faculties must be developed within every vehicle, and that each life is simply an opportunity to expand our consciousness. Each incarnation offers new opportunities to carry on the work unfinished or perhaps missed in the last life. If we understand the purpose of incarnation and awaken to our spiritual work or dharma early in life, then much progress can be made. We must know thyself as the true arbiter of our own destiny, and recognize that the conditions in which we find ourselves will never improve unless we make them improve. There must be an unswerving steadfastness within the chela to make progress upon the path, in order that opportunities are not missed. Certain goals are accomplished and specific lessons are learned. If a strong curiosity of life and its mysteries are not present, then there will be little to swing you into right action. a human enters the world bound by associations. No human soul is ever wholly free. In every incarnation, the necessity for birth and accepting a family position limits us. Therefore, it is folly to say, "I must wait until I am free." One is never free except as one earns and achieves freedom. The power to compel circumstances to yield results marks the beginning of growth. The path of discipleship requires right decisions. One must act, if possible, with the greatest detachment. At best, one sees but a small portion of the path that lies ahead. When the occult student has gained a certain measure of discrimination and adjusted their life with the new insight it gives them, they turn their attention to the specific control of their vehicles. The Chela is taught to control all lesser desires since they only act as bonds of limitation. Or rather, desire to attain the goal must draw all other desires into a single flame of purpose and of will. Gradually, he or she must learn indifference to pleasures. This does not mean aestheticism or denial of pleasure, but it means gradual indifference as to whether pleasure comes or not. Yet, all self-indulgences must be overcome. Although love in itself is one form of high spirituality, it must not bind. It must pass from personal attachment into more impersonal tenderness, which can even speak the difficult truths which may hurt or anger a loved one, if it's in their own best interest. The goal of divinity is indeed a goal of high adventure. We venture to win the unknown, a but dimly envisioned prize. When the spiritual student has consciously chosen the path, they are ready to attempt the perilous ascent. As an explorer prepares by studying the conditions they must face, by learning the language needful, by gaining physical fitness, so too the spiritual pilgrim who seeks the path of liberation, the most dangerous of all adventures, must do likewise. For this great task of spiritual achievement requires the utmost expenditure of force in every direction and requires physical, mental, and moral fitness in the highest degree. No explorer who seeks the North Pole can endanger their success by physical indulgence, moral slackness, or mental inefficiency. The price of inefficiency and weakness is death. In the adventure of all adventures, the discovery of godhood, inefficiency leads to despair, and sometimes even madness. Often, the greatest enemy to our spiritual growth is our own personal self, and true compassion cannot be shown to the prejudices and peculiarities of an unworthy instrument. Compassion in its truest sense inflicts discipline upon the personality, that it may relinquish its paralyzing grasp upon the soul. Hence, on the evolutionary arc, the grip of matter must be lessened upon the vehicles. That grip which had been so strongly applied during the earlier cycle of involution, millions of years ago. There are two great motives which lead one to the path of spiritual occultism: the search for the hidden truth of the universe, which comes from an eagerness to glimpse the eternal, and the other from a great love for humanity, which leads to the desire for selfless service. In order to help the suffering world, one will offer all that they have and devote themselves to the study of the path and to the achievement of bringing light into the world. This is the path of devotion. It is, of all paths, the safest and surest one, for it lessens the danger of aggregating spiritual power for personal ends, the line of danger, the line of the destructive forces, which endanger the soul's link to the personality. Evil is caused by the evil in our own hearts. We suffer not from the blows of nature, but from the corrupt and evil civilization which we have built. However wisely and skillfully great minds may build civilizations, these civilizations cannot endure so long as corruption in human hearts perverts the wisest of forms to serve their selfish purposes. As humanity becomes spiritually awakened, it will save itself from the suffering which ignorance, selfishness, and indifference have shackled upon the world. Awakening the soul in others becomes of paramount importance as one walks the path, since only through this awakening of souls can true peace and joy come upon the earth. The work of the Chela on the probationary path, that path which enters the battleground of true self-realization, is guided by various forces, including that of the teacher or guide who gives timely instructions and warnings which bear upon the nature of the test to come, and the testing agents who are given freedom by the soul to test the personality. Until the time of probation, there are certain magnetic protections around the personality formed partly by the soul, partly by the great groups of spiritual agents upon the inner planes, who, throughout the ages, have built great reservoirs of power for this exact purpose. These shells or insulating walls protect the personality vehicles from assaults from the most destructive elementals of nature. This protection, however, ceases to avail if certain conditions are brought about. First, excessive use of drugs or alcohol. Secondly, association with people already obsessed, or shall I say possessed, by these elemental forces, as in insane asylums. The third is the use of certain occult practices which sometimes prematurely awaken the Kundalini fire, which burns away this protective sheath of the vehicles. Unless exposed to one of these three dangers, under ordinary conditions, a pupil is protected. But when he or she seeks to become a Chela, they are of necessity given some of the tests to prove themselves fit and capable of properly controlling occult forces. He or she must prove their power not only to resist attacks upon themselves, but to control the power of these elemental forces. The Chela must know, finally, that all forces, both good and evil, are latent within their own nature. Uncontrolled force falls into vice. Yet those forces which gravitate into vice and violence in the early stages are just those which make your evolution possible and which give you control, finally, over nature's more constructive forces. But a Chela should not adventure too far upon the path until their virtues are strong enough to sustain them. Otherwise, the increase of power opens the door to the downward way of vice. The path of spiritual occultism is often strewn with wrecks. Verily, since too soon or too unprepared, many have challenged the destructive forces of nature, which they must eventually conquer in order to tread the path. Beware of seeking to tread the path too soon, lest the forces there awaken within you sleeping devils before you have gained the strength of soul to conquer them. During this period of temptation, all the forces of nature, within you and without, rise up to test your unselfishness. In the history of every great teacher, we find this described through the various metaphors, even the Buddha and the Christ. However great the temptations of worldly pleasure may be, they are nothing compared to the temptations and dangers which beset the chela who has challenged the hidden side of nature by seeking conquest on the path of initiation. Therefore, one should be slow to judge too harshly the apparent disastrous failures of occult students who have dared greatly, but unfortunately not too wisely. When exposed to the power of destructive forces, the chela becomes the battleground of Kurukshetra, as described in the Hindu parlance, in which the forces of the personality built through the ages of combat and selfishness on the involutionary arc struggle with the forces of the spirit on the evolutionary arc, which seek to master them. Yet, our full nature must be brought to maturity, cleansed, purified, and set towards service. Forces within your own nature, when uncontrolled, are dangerous, and therefore, in the unevolved human, are left slumbering as long as possible. Yet within the chela, these forces must be roused and set forth so that he or she may learn to control them, and therefore eventually gain mastery over them. The force of anger, once mastered, becomes a titan harnessed. Wrath in the uncontrolled man leads to violence, murder, and cruelty, yet it is the source of power, which, when wisely directed, gives man control of destructive forces. The power for passion, which in its earlier stages manifests as sensuality, is the strong root buried in the soil, which in the later stages shall flower into divine compassion. Greed, which makes a man gluttonous and selfish, will, in time, develop the energy of intelligence and forethought, which shall bring all nature into subjection. These three great powers eventually liberate the energy wherein you will achieve divinity. In their crude form, they are destructive, but like fire, water, or electricity, when harnessed properly, they prove to be the most dynamic agents for the service of humanity. Not only do outward circumstances bring difficulties into life, which much needed courage, coolness, and endurance can surmount, but within our own nature awaken demons of destruction, which rise like ghastly specters of an unholy past. We unite within ourselves both the destructive power of demons and the constructive power of angels. When these two are held subservient to our awakening will, pledged to the service of God and to all mankind, we have gained that conquest of self, which makes us, a master of the wisdom, and the powers of nature are therefore obedient to our own will, which is now aligned perfectly with divine will. You become a master not only by your glorious virtue, or by your feats of magic, nor by your powers of vision and intuition, but by your conquest of the elemental forces within your own nature. From the battleground, you emerge triumphant, knowing good from evil, knowing temptation and knowing conquest. You stand steadfast, poised and masterful, directing these forces by your awakened will. When you have learned to wisely direct these forces within yourself, you can likewise direct them in nature. No one can master what they do not understand. And the great atonement of spiritual teachers comes from understanding the sinner's problem. The ability to conquer the forces which others still fail to do, and by sharing the strength achieved in past conflicts, helps those to arise and to assail victoriously the ancient foe. The tests of the Chela are mostly inner ones. Often when the battle is raging most furiously within, outwardly your life may be calm and untroubled. The forces of the lower self rise up in defiance because, while on the path of probation, the light of the soul is now shining brighter than in any prior incarnation. Likewise, its presence is being felt more strongly than ever before. When the light shines brighter, the darkness is illuminated. You must learn to harness this energy in any given moment. Lose yourself in work, not necessarily world-shaking activities, of which every young soul dreams, but often the daily drudgery which must be glorified by the spirit in which it is done. Washing dishes becomes a holy exercise when done in a spirit of divine contemplation. The test of the Chela is your power to do well, happily and joyously, that task before you, however great or obscure. The hallmark of the true master is spiritual greatness of soul, not of power of mind or success in politics, religion, or science. Not by their powers, mental or occult, do we know them, but by their inner majesty of spirit. We have seen that the preliminary training of the pupil is carried out upon the inner planes, where they are taught the purpose of life, the vision of the goal, and the methods to reach the goal. From the teaching which filters through from the inner planes to our waking consciousness, the pupil learns to orient themselves in life so that the goal of liberation dominates our actions. Within you is awakened, likewise, the spirit of compassion, which must guide you safely through the perilous way of ascent. The first class is to awaken your consciousness to recognition of the laws of evolution and of the purpose of life. The second group began your training and taught you control of the vehicles. The third is open only to those who have proven themselves worthy and dedicated, who have passed the preliminary tests and pledged themselves to follow the light at any cost. In the third group of classes, experimental work is done in dealing with conditions on the inner planes. Usually, several years elapse in preparatory classes before entering the third group. Groups of pupils are also divided according to their need for training. Maps are made of their characters, plotting their qualities and weaknesses, so they know themselves, and the development of certain qualities are marked for immediate attention. Then karma is adjusted as to give them conditions in which these qualities can be developed most easily, for instance, courage and persistence, or patience and self-control. Difficulties and problems arise in the outer life which will demand the development of the required quality. If the pupil meets these successfully, he or she will rapidly achieve the progress desired. They should therefore look upon these difficult conditions as special opportunities vouchsafed to them whereby they can make more rapid progress. It is often hard, when one is seeking to live a more spiritual life, to find daily problems suddenly intensified. But this intensification marks the attention of the soul, turned to pressing its personality or instrument forward. Difficulties are then opportunities, not penalties. If the pupil can surmount these difficulties, they will rapidly clear away the obstacles in the path of their progress. Upon the inner planes are found the chapels of silence, where echoes of the cosmic song can be heard. It is here where interplanetary exchanges take place, where the Great White Lodge of our planet reports to the Greater Lodge within the solar system. Used for various purposes, these chapels have around them a magnetic sheath which isolates them from contact with coarser vibrations from the three lower worlds. For example, Devachan is a heavenly world which exists upon the higher mental plane, and acts as a place of refuge where souls can find refreshment and rest from their arduous labors before reincarnating back into the lower worlds. The chapels of silence are also used on special occasions during specific times as receiving stations for cosmic energies or vibrations from other planets, and for meditation and reflection. The stillness and isolation from outer thought forms permit the bodies to be tranquilized, and the chela can gradually cleanse the vehicles of self-initiated activities. When this occurs, you can, in a curious way, see into your own vehicles and study their texture, structure, and characteristics or qualities, and learn much about yourself and glimpse what qualities are still lacking. You begin to know yourself and see the plan of your evolution from the vantage point of the causal body. Structure means the basic type of response to vibration in the vehicles. Texture indicates the fineness or coarseness of the matter drawn into them. Quality or character means the varying powers of mind and emotion built in by their virtues and vices. In the chapels of silence, one learns to see themselves as they truly are. Everyone has a fundamental response to life, which is your keynote, the keystone of your arc, determined by your ray and subray. First, you discover whether you are interested in the form and building the form, or in the thought which lies behind the form. There is a very fundamental difference between the two, which continues up to the Godhead. In all nature, in all evolution, there are two great forces at work, one shaping the form, and the other unfolding the spirit. And these two, working together, are the secret of all manifestation and of all progression. In the final analysis, everyone must be allied to one side or the other. All artists, architects, gardeners, sculptors, and surgeons respond to the building of form, whereas teachers, political leaders, writers, philosophers, scientists, and soldiers respond to the spur of spirit or the impulse of mind. One may interpret all things in terms of color, another sound, or another of form. One may be geometric in their thought forms, another create more indefinite flashes of light. Another may link with human feelings and characteristics and therefore interpret vibrations in terms of mankind. whereas another may interpret in terms of nature, akin to the spirit expressed in mountains, fields, and trees. As mentioned earlier, all is determined by the greater ray and plane upon which you function, and even more specifically, to the particular subray and subplane which you are attuned. In these chapels of silence, the disciple slowly begins to see themselves as if reflected in a mirror. You learn the keynote of each vehicle. First of the lower three, belonging to the personality, body, emotions, and mind, and later to the causal body. Frequently, each vehicle manifests a different one of the three gunas, or attributes: activity, rhythm, and stability. Some have activity of the body, some activity of emotions, others activity of the mind. Some have activity of all three. In other cases, the dominant quality of the dominant vehicle overshadows or reflects itself in the other two. Intense mental activity of the lower mind usually manifests as restlessness in the physical body. Activity in the emotional body also shows itself in action, but rather in impulsive actions and in the need for excitement, rather than restless physical activity. Rhythmic vibration that is harmonious in the lower vehicles creates a pleasant effect for all who are near that person, but it often means lack of power in the mind. In any case, the disciple is told not to change the type of activity, but rather to develop it into its highest qualities and apply proper control over it. Slowness of mind serves concentration and continued effort. The mind does not tire easily and makes the persistent student. Swiftness of mind brings alertness and action in emergencies. Rhythm brings harmony, but sometimes indecision, because of the ability to see both sides, can make it difficult to decide. Stability in the vehicles as a fixed expression often reflects itself as stubbornness and the inability to learn quickly, but it means endurance, steadfastness, and usually loyalty. In each case, a balancing point must be sought, where the best qualities of the type of vehicle are used and counterbalanced. It must be clearly understood that the three gunas, action, stability, and rhythm are manifestations of three types of force which exist in the universe. Neither can be said to be better than the other. They are merely different, with distinctive uses and qualities. Rajas, or action, can be likened in the physical world to electricity, inertia or stability to the immobile strength of mountains, and rhythm with the ceaseless movement of the sea. Rhythm is often interpreted as harmony. In actuality, it is only the intermediate balancing force of the other two. You must learn the dominant force within yourself. The main source of motive is kama manas, or mind colored by desire, ambition and love being the two common forces, masculine and feminine. They manifest themselves into the three vehicles. Ambition in the physical manifests as ambition for physical power, in the emotional as ambition for domination over others, and in the mind as ambition for conquest in the mental world. Love manifests first in the physical body as sensual indulgence, second in the emotional as an intense sex nature, a constant demand for attention, and the third in the mental as desire to feel one's sex power over men or women, regardless of the pain inflicted. These are, of course, the vices, the lower types of these forces, or the distortion of these energies by the ego. These two great forces, love and ambition, are replicas of buddhi and manas, or intuition and mind, negative and positive, and are modified by the types of matter in which they work upon each of the 7 planes. As the student learns to know themselves, as you learn your tools, as you learn what qualities are needed to protect yourself from the shadow of your own powers, and these you seek to unfold. Being violent or destructive needs poise and tenderness. Inertia or stability needs energy aroused by the motive of devotion. Rhythm needs steadfastness and perseverance. Each ray and sub-ray have its compensating ray or quality which must be developed to establish balance. It is the purpose of the teacher to instruct each student to know themselves, to know their type, their way or line of development, and their strengths and weaknesses. The purpose is not to change the type of force, but to develop it to its highest point of efficiency. In order to do this, the powers peculiar to your ray must be unfolded at the same time the necessary safeguards to the dangers of that ray built in, so that through your training you become efficient, balanced, and dependable. When the disciple has entered the preliminary classes and passed through the preliminary training outlined, they are taken night after night to special magnetized areas in the inner worlds, where certain forces can be played upon them, which result in definite stimulation of certain aspects of their vehicles. After the disciple has learned somewhat of their nature and has made the first steps in knowledge of the self during the preliminary classes and in the chapels of silence, they are placed under the supervision of one of the senior disciples, who carries out a program laid down by one of the masters. And in this way, visit museums where replicas of ancient ceremonies are on display in order to stimulate within them memories of forces and truths gained in earlier lives. Flashes of the past then come into the waking consciousness as feelings or thoughts, or even as pictures. These early experiences, however, should not be given too much weight. They are but broken memories which are vivified in order to assure the waking consciousness of the reality of the inner worlds. True vision comes later, vision of work now on hand, or to be attained in the future. Fragments of the past must not establish old habits of thought or feeling which would not be suitable to the present point of development. In each age, the methods change because the energies change. What worked then will not necessarily work now or later. The next step is establishment of certain qualities in the character, which balance vices and virtues. Once the chela has accomplished the required work at hand and taken the necessary steps along the path, they are brought into one of the classes of the masters. Few students make it this far, but those who do make rapid progress thereafter. From here, he or she may obtain some degree of insight into the Great White Lodge or spiritual hierarchy of our planet. This will undoubtedly give a glimpse of what lies ahead, but not necessarily the next immediate step forward. The Masters of Wisdom, that group of liberated souls who work as the custodians of the plan, endeavor to lead all souls toward the gateway of liberation. During the training and testing of the chela on the probationary path, their progress is watched and recorded by a senior disciple, or sometimes even a master of the wisdom. The sum of efforts, of failures, and of successes are recorded, and according to the balance of these, force is either increased or decreased. When you first place your foot upon that narrow path which leads to initiation, of your own free will, you challenge fate and demand from the gods the priceless gift of discipline. This discipline must not only make you a kind person, but also a wise person, a powerful person, but above all, a person who has been tested in every way for human weakness and has thus conquered, not by suppression, but by transmutation. With all said and done, the point of view that the occult student takes upon the probationary path must differ from that of the average person in the world. It is not others' attitudes toward you, but rather your attitude toward the world which determines your progress. You must prove that you are free from the dangers of hatred. You may feel hurt, you may feel upset, you may feel injustice, but you must accept these without hatred. As difficult as it may seem, your enemies are your best teachers, since they offer the tests which alone can assure your spiritual unfoldment. This does not mean that when someone becomes an initiate, they will be free from all human weakness. But it does mean you have shown powers of stability, perseverance, and compassion, and a desire for service to the world. It's not that you must attain full control over your lower nature, but a measure of control. You must meet disappointment and betrayal, actual or seeming, with a sense of self-control. Therefore, it matters not if we seem unjustly treated. It matters only whether we be just to others. It is often difficult to remember this when suffering the indignities of persecution. Look upon these hardships as opportunities and not penalties. In the end, the Akashic records show the truth, and you will be judged accurately to the last tiny act. When a pupil has definitely sought the probationary path and turned their face to the goal of divinity, when they have proved their eagerness and dedication, they are allowed to draw upon the Master's forces for inspiration, strength, and encouragement. But when the hour of test comes, the Master withdraws their aid so that the inner strength of the chela can be proven. Each time you break through the mist of illusion thrown upon you, the light within surges and increases its steady glow. Another facet of the divine jewel has been polished, to remain ever as a testimony of your divine heritage. From this point, you begin to draw yourself closer to the Master's aura and share in the work of the inner ashram. The use of this force expands and develops your vehicles and their powers. Your brain increases in power, your devotion in purity, your actions in accuracy, and your vitality in voltage. At the same time, you begin definite training upon the inner planes, where you are taught the use and control of specific forces there. Little by little, you gain knowledge of the control of various elements, of elementals connected with them, and of devas in charge of the elementals. You are taught the line of evolution of these elementals, the motive power of their action, and the type of force which they obey. This differs greatly for different groups of devas and their corresponding elementals. To accomplish this control, 3 things are needed: serenity, dedication, and courage. Many people fail in handling elementals because they lose control of themselves and are therefore attacked by the forces they use. In the same way as an electrical engineer might endanger himself if, in a fit of irritation, he jammed the machinery controlling the currents of high voltage. Therefore, as you progress further and further each step along the way, you are only given access to power slightly above your threshold. This allows you to advance steadily, but with the least amount of risk. Once you have passed all these tests and proved yourself fit for advancement, and by carrying out the Master's force successfully, and by resisting attacks, you pass to the point of becoming an accepted disciple. In all these things, you are taught how to command the service of devas and elementals in the name and by the authority of the White Lodge, as an agent of its power. This means you will have access to reservoirs of the Master's powers at any time while conducting your service work. You will then begin to find the specific force that you need for service. While on probation, you found at times a downpour of force to meet some special need, but now you can summon it at will. Beyond this point lies the portal of initiation, and beyond that, the holy heights of divine consciousness. After many lifetimes of treading the probationary path and eventually becoming an accepted disciple, the time approaches for the Master to present the Chela for initiation. The chela must prove to the satisfaction of the spiritual hierarchy that they are fit for power to be bestowed upon them. They must have passed certain definite tests along the path of discipleship in order to prove the progress they have made. You must prove not only your desire for service, but your capacity to succeed, and through all the hours of waking consciousness in every action of the day, you must see the opportunity to discipline your vehicles and improve your powers of mind. The qualifications are divided into 4 major groups: point of view, renunciation, power, sacrifice. These have been variously stated and are sometimes called discrimination, desirelessness, right conduct, and love. Let us analyze them another way, as to throw added light upon the practical problem of attainment. Point of view, or orientation. It has been said that the greatest gift a master can give their pupil is a change in their point of view. As one passes through the 7 ages of man, from childhood to maturity, the most noticeable change is that of your point of view. The highlights of childish joy fade as the desires of adolescence arise. The desires of adolescence make way for the ambition and mental achievement of maturity. Increasing discrimination between relative values, between the important and the unimportant, constitutes maturity of the soul. In the latter cycles of incarnation, the powers of mind become more essential than the powers of the body. Brute force is valuable for the primitive man, but not necessarily for the civilized man. Yet, just as the brute force, which has taught the primitive man to defend his own tribe, lays the foundation for that loyalty and sacrifice for the family, which marks the best type of civilized man, so too the virtues of the civilized man lead directly to the more impersonal virtues of the spiritual occultist. In no way are standards of the spiritual occultist relaxed. On the contrary, they are more stringent. Just as the civilized man has developed a strong sense of personal love for his family, the spiritual occultist must develop impersonal love for all humanity. Eventually, this must be held as the greatest value. Indeed, this must be so, for as you progress in power and begin to direct and distribute the occult forces of the planet, you must be above the temptation of seeking to use them for your own aggrandizement. Just as the distributor of public funds must be above the temptation of diverting any of those funds for the use of their own family. The secret brotherhood is indeed a pledged army, pledged to guard and protect the planet as far as lies in its power from evil and destructive forces. With all said and done, the fundamental change of one's orientation, or point of view is that they no longer seek to just live as a human being, but as a soul, first and foremost. The next great qualification is usually expressed as renunciation or desirelessness. It is the gradual tearing loose of those tentacles which hold us to the personal life, of the multitude of small desires which govern and make up the majority of our personality. One must lose the fear of life and the fear of death. And yet, every soldier, perforce, practices these virtues, especially during the mass emotion of a great emergency. The human tree has its roots in the ground, and it clings to the earth and feels that all the majesty of its leafy head comes from its strong grip upon the soil. And this is true. The power and success of the personal life depends a good deal upon its grip on the physical plane and the multitude of little desires that run out like tentacles and hook onto various aspects of physical being. If you tear these ruthlessly asunder, the very life force of the incarnation dies. It dies into indifference, into lethargy, and into death. Such destruction must be avoided. Those tentacles which lead to strength and power must not be torn loose until they can be re-established above in the impersonal worlds to feed the impersonal life. Instead of drawing sustenance from the earth, they must draw sustenance from the spiritual worlds above. As the orchid draws its sustenance from the air and seeks no contact with the rich soil of earth, so too the occultist must draw their life from the inner worlds. Personal desires must be consumed by the flame of devotion. In the truest sense, desirelessness means selflessness. Yet it does not require aestheticism, nor suggest it. Aestheticism is no virtue in itself, except insofar as it is a means to an end to teach self-conquest. Yet the purpose of life is not aestheticism, but self-mastery. One should not renounce the joy in beauty, nor the capacity for love and tenderness, nor the power of affection for those near and dear. True renunciation requires freedom from the grip of the elementals, which for so many lives are the forces to which you act and react. For example, it is not necessary to refrain from food. It is only necessary to control the appetite so that wisdom guides it instead of desire. This is true of all physical functions. Every function in the physical body has its godlike purpose, but undeveloped humans are a pawn of nature, guided only by the elemental forces which pushed them out of the animal kingdom. Until you are released from the grip of the elementals, you are not free. Renunciation means complete subjugation of personal will to divine will. The third qualification is power. This requires the development of all the forces latent in the vehicles, roused, purified, and directed by the divine flame of spiritual will. Only awakened spiritual fire can carry you onward through the trials and dangers which beset the path. Indeed, without it, all else is valueless. True power depends upon skill in action, directed by a flaming will. You must begin to polish and perfect all the powers of the personality, directing this skillful instrument in service of the divine self. Many people often aspire to the spiritual life by neglecting the personality or disregarding it, and seek to dwell in a fancy realm far removed from the physical world. This is diametrically opposed to the actual plan and purpose of evolution. We are here in the three lower worlds of form to perfect an instrument. The purpose of human incarnation is to develop the powers latent in form, to unfold, control, and direct them. It must be remembered that the purpose of the spiritual occultists differs from the purpose of the average good person in the world. With the occultist, the achievement of virtue is but the preliminary steps to the achievement of spiritual power. Virtue must safeguard the use of power, but virtue without power can accomplish very little. In the inner worlds, no one without virtue can be considered, but no one without power can be accepted. The proper use of spiritual power must be developed from these 6 qualities: enthusiasm, faith, courage, skill in action, selflessness, and obedience. The final great qualification is sometimes called love, and sometimes sacrifice. Sacrifice in the sense of making all things sacred. Love, in its highest expression, is sacrifice, for it sanctifies all things that it touches. It means offering all that we have and are toward the service of the divine plan. No personal love nor personal tie can ever make you falter in your allegiance to the highest vision, that you are free. Not free from love, but free from that elemental urge which sweeps humans on like a rushing wind, so that in the service of their beloved one, they know neither good nor evil. They know only what they call love. It is from this that you must be free. That expression of the personality, which we call love, has distinctive boundaries and limitations. But the love that is expressed by the soul is completely selfless and inclusive. This is the love we must aspire to, a love that goes beyond our family, beyond our race or culture, a love that includes all humanity and that extends to the furthest reaches of known space. Indeed, this is a lofty type of love, which to the personality may seem impractical or a far-off dream, but nevertheless, it is the innate expression of every human soul. Our readiness for this kind of love determines our progress upon the path. Throughout our long path of ascent, ever before us gleams the goal of the narrow gateway of liberation. Through this, we must pass to gain our heritage. And when we reach at last the snowy peaks of consciousness, which marks the spiritual adept, you will have fulfilled the purpose of human incarnations. From these heights, you will determine whether you shall go onward to other realms of experience, or turn back to help your younger brethren to achieve as you have achieved. Only having passed through the gateway after crossing the burning ground can you truly know yourself and the great law which determines the plan for all humanity. Once you glimpse this law, once you pledge yourself to cooperate with it, you begin to gain knowledge and wisdom to help this darkened star. Before that, all is darkness, and you cannot see how to serve, for the darkness is your own mind. Only as you learn the truth regarding the purpose of life and the method of achievement, not intellectually, but from true inner knowledge, or gnosis, can you truly help mankind. In the final analysis of the inner conflict and struggle within ourselves, the spirit of altruism must win the day. Through the narrow gate of self-sacrifice, where it is stripped of all worldly attachments, must pass the awakened soul on its journey to spiritual fulfillment and liberation. Near the entrance of the gate are attendant devils who whisper of the lost pleasures who forsakes, who turns their face from the world of lost joys, lost comforts, which are indeed only phantoms, but which lure the mind of the unperceiving. All that is impermanent must pass away from your consciousness, so that you hold only to the eternal verities, of which these fantasies are but flickering shadows, acting only as beacons to help you search for the real. At the heart of every delight lies the germ of reality, which leads one to seek the perpetuation of this delight. It is but a toy given to a child to teach them to yearn for the reality it represents, as a girl is given a doll to teach her the virtues of motherhood. So life offers us symbols of eternal things, but breaks them in our hands lest we believe them real. Neither love, nor joy, nor happiness, nor work can remain eternally to comfort us in this realm of the unreal if we give our heart to the world of shadows and fail to seek the world of reality where lies our heritage. Love unspeakable, joy unbelievable, peace unbreakable awaits us in the realms of godhood. But we must first give back all the tokens we have gathered here before we may reach upward to that which awaits us there. These three things should be understood. First, the mark of spiritual power is not phenomena. It is radiance, a clear white light which shines about the personality like a halo. It may be sensed by those who have developed the required sensitivity. Second, it is not intellect, but wisdom which marks the spiritual teacher. Wisdom coming from the heart, from the understanding of life and of human consciousness. Third, there must be spiritual insight, not just clairvoyance, which is only an extension of sight, nor clairaudience, which is an extension of hearing, but spiritual penetration, which permits a soul to see the heart of reality, to recognize true living values, and to strip others of the veils of illusion and delusion, which so often grasp the personality. True spiritual power seeks only to light the flame within another heart, the flame of spiritual fire, which burns away the personal self. These are the hallmarks of spiritual potency. A word on compassion. The Christ is no sentimentalist. He is a living flame, a lightning flash of white light. It is this office within the spiritual hierarchy to withstand all evil forces. But destructive forces are here for a purpose, and they must fulfill that purpose. You must win your divinity through self-conquest. It is not simply bestowed upon you. You enter human life to risk failure and damnation to attain the crown of the creative mind. Only as you conquer evil within yourself and in the elemental worlds can you achieve liberation. When the soul has passed through broken and troubled waters, when pain and anguish of mind and body have done their work, then you are ready to turn away from the turmoil at any price and seek peace. Only then are you ready to enter the spiritual life, and only then can you value and appreciate it. Earlier, it would have been unsatisfying, for heaven is not the satisfaction of the senses, but, on the contrary, it is the starvation of the senses, or the satisfaction of the spirit. Many younger souls cannot yet enter the higher worlds consciously, even after death, for they have no capacity for the enjoyment of the things which heaven offers. They are still earthbound, and for these younger souls, there are earthbound paradises established in the astral worlds, likened to playgrounds. Eon after eon, we pass through the trials and tribulations of human life. Evolution through denser matter is undertaken to slowly learn how to unfurl the pinions of the spirit, and this alone is worthy of achievement. Know and obey the law. Pledge yourself to a life of service. Above all else, liberation should be the true goal of your life. Study the laws which are eternal, and through them shall come the faint glimmer of eternal truth. In all generations, in all powers, on all planets, this great law persists. It is that for which the whole universe has come into being. It is also that for which the solar deities seek to realize. To the law are all things known. By the law are all things possible. One must stand before this realization with the most profound reverence and humility. Its power and presence are beyond anything of this world. It transcends all things. Seek it within yourself, and when you find it, bow before its majesty, wheresoever and howsoever it be expressed. For as we learn to fulfill the law, so do we learn to know ourselves, our world, and our place within it. Only then do we achieve true power, for this law is eternal. Obey, servants of the law, obey.